These men tore their own bodies apart with their own hands, and the price they paid for it was something out of a nightmare.
There are guys that are taking drugs, hurting themselves. I see it in their organs. And not to mention, they shut off their own natural production of testosterone, and they feel horrible.
They pumped chemicals into themselves so toxic their blood thickened into something closer to tar. Some swallowed compounds so brutal their organs forgot how to work without them. Others drained every last ounce of fluid from their own bodies just to look sharper under stage lights. And when surgeons finally opened them up, what was inside wasn't human anymore. Organs rotting from within, livers falling apart the second a hand touched them. To be honest, what doctors found inside these men will totally mess you. Andreas Münzer. Surgeons opened Andreas Münzer up expecting to find organs. What they found was a disaster. His liver was not a liver anymore. It had turned into something like a sponge, filled with holes packed with blood, and those holes tore open the second the doctor's hands touched them. Pieces of it broke apart right in the surgeon's fingers. His kidneys had already given out. His heart was barely moving, and his blood had gone heavy, slow, and black, like a liquid you would expect to find in a clogged drain not running through a person. The surgeon running that operation said Andreas looked like a ghost still walking around in a body that had already given up. Andreas was 31 years old, and he was seen as the most extreme, most flawlessly built bodybuilder the sport had ever produced. Here is what it actually took to build that body. Stay with this part, because it turns ugly fast. Andreas had about 20 different drugs moving through his system at once, not one after another, not in rotation, all 20 every single day. Some forced his muscles to swell past anything a human body was ever meant to hold. Some pulled every drop of fluid out from under his skin until his muscle sat raw against the surface with nothing covering it. And some were there for one reason only: to kill the pain so his brain stayed blind to the fact that his body was shutting down. This was not just something he did for competition. He stayed in that condition all year round, 365 days, which meant his body never had a single day to recover from any of it. In the last hours before a show, he would inject something built to pull fluid straight out of his blood, his organs, his cells, all to look sharper under the lights for a few minutes. What it left behind was horrifying to look at. Every vein in his body pushed up under his skin stretched so thin against his bones that he barely looked alive. All of that for a trophy, all of that for a few seconds of applause. In 1996, he went backstage in Germany, and something very terrifying happened. Pain suddenly tore through his stomach. Internal bleeding spread fast through his body with nothing left to fight it. They rushed him into surgery, and what the doctors found when they cut him open stopped every single one of them in their tracks. His adrenal glands had withered and died. Years of synthetic hormones had taught his body to stop making its own. His testicles had shrunk to the size of grapes. His liver was bleeding out through dozens of collapsed pockets that gave way at the lightest touch. He did not die on that table right away. He held on through the night. He drifted in and out. He was reportedly begging the doctors to make the pain stop. He lay there while his liver kept caving in on itself, and the poison it could no longer clear out moved into his blood and climbed toward his brain. He was 31 years old, rotting from the inside while he was still breathing. After he died, they found a journal among his things, years of entries written in his own hand, every drug, every dose, every single day logged. He knew exactly what he was doing to himself the whole time. The surgeon's words never left anyone who heard them. He looked like a ghost that had kept walking, and behind him the whole time sat a stage, a roaring crowd, and a sport that had spent years cheering that ghost on without once looking away. Rich Piana. A simple haircut is what killed Rich Piana. He was sitting in the chair when his body just gave out and he slid onto the floor. Nobody in that room understood yet what they were watching. For more than 30 minutes his brain got no oxygen at all before anyone reached him. The man who had spent years on camera telling millions of strangers the truth about what this sport really does to a person was already gone by the time paramedics walked in. They did not load a dying man into that ambulance. They loaded a body. He was 46, and inside bodybuilding circles, nobody had a reputation for blunt honesty like Rich Piana did. Rich started injecting hormones into himself at 18 years old, and he never once stopped for the next 27 years. His own hormone production had shut down so long ago his body had no memory of how to do it naturally anymore. By his own admission, during his most extreme stretch, he was putting enough synthetic hormone into his body to cover 10 average men, not as a single daily dose, multiple times throughout the day. Year after year, his liver took the hit, scarring and swelling until it ballooned to double its normal size. His heart carried the same damage, thickening and straining under a workload nothing in nature ever prepared it for. What makes this worse is that he was fully aware. His girlfriend has said as much publicly. Go watch the videos he posted in his final weeks, and the signs are all sitting right there in plain view. A slight tremor runs through his hands the whole time he's talking. His breath catches between his own sentences. Fluid had swollen his face because his body had lost the ability to flush it out. Millions of viewers tuned into those same videos and left nothing but compliments and fire emojis in the comments. Not a single person flagged it. He never flagged it either. Paramedics arrived at his home and counted 20 separate bottles of testosterone. Layered on top of his hormone use, Rich had also been battling an opioid addiction, so medics administered an overdose reversal drug to him twice, just to rule everything out. His heart started again, but 30 minutes with no oxygen had already inflicted brain damage that no surgeon or specialist was ever going to reverse. As Rich lay brain dead in that hospital room, something crazy happened. The two most important women in his life turned on each other, fighting over who had the legal standing to make decisions on his behalf. His ex-wife stood her ground on one side. His girlfriend stood hers on the other. His family eventually stepped in and made the decision everyone had been avoiding. They turned the machines off. Rich used to say it takes whatever it takes. In the end, it took his brain, then his heart, then the rest of him followed. Dallas McCarver. Alexa Adams walked into the room and found Dallas slumped face down in his own plate of food. He had choked. She was a professional bodybuilder in her own right, the woman who loved him, who had trained beside him day after day, who had watched him carve out that massive frame one punishing session at a time and knew, more than anyone alive, exactly what it had stolen from him. Now she stood there frozen, staring at that same body, lifeless, face buried in his plate. She hit the floor on her knees and slammed her hands down on his chest, pushing as hard as her body would let her. The voice on the emergency line kept telling her not to stop, so she didn't. She kept pounding on his chest and shouting his name into a face that would never respond again. None of it brought him back. Dallas McCarver was already dead. The autopsy results landed like a blow to the gut. His heart weighed 690 grams. A healthy heart sits at roughly 300. His had ballooned to more than double that, straining to force blood through a body far too large for it to handle. Doctors also uncovered proof of several minor heart attacks in the weeks leading up to that night. His body had been begging him to stop for a long time. He just kept shutting it up every time. Dallas was cycling through a drug regimen so extreme and so costly, it reportedly drained tens of thousands of dollars from him each month. 16 to 18 separate substances tearing through his bloodstream simultaneously. His coach, Chad Nichols, had earned a reputation in the sport for handing athletes doses other professionals flat out called impossible to survive. One competitor who briefly trained under that same coach walked away after 3 weeks, his hands too swollen from the drugs to even hold a razor. Dallas never walked away. He pushed harder. He trained twice a day, every day, morning and night, fueling a body whose hormone levels had been driven 57 times past what any human is naturally meant to hold. His organs weren't simply aging like a 26-year-old's. They were collapsing in a matter of months. By the time he died, his heart, kidneys, and liver all resembled those of a man in his 70s. In the final weeks of his life, Dallas was hit with chest pain so brutal he had to stop during training just to grab the nearest rack just to stay upright. He told someone close to him it felt like a fist pressed against his chest that refused to let go. He refused to go to the hospital. He just went on with his life. The morning he died, he had already finished a training session. The food he choked on was a post-workout meal meant to bulk him up. Some doctors who later examined the case believe his heart may have already been collapsing at the exact moment his throat lost control and he inhaled his food, meaning he was being killed from 2 directions simultaneously. Doctors said that even if the choking had never happened, Dallas had only weeks left, possibly fewer. His body had been screaming the same warning for months straight. He simply refused to stop long enough to listen. Nasser El Sonbaty. You will not believe what was left of Nasser El Sonbaty in his final months. This was a man who, back in 1997, stood on the Mr. Olympia stage and was widely believed by fans and insiders alike to have beaten every single competitor in that room. The judges still handed the title to Dorian Yates. Plenty of people in that arena never got over that decision. Neither did Nasser. But the body that had come so agonizingly close to the top of this sport? Gone. What replaced it in his final months looked like a swollen, distorted nightmare of the man he used to be. His kidneys had shut down completely. Yes, completely. A machine was cleaning his blood for him because his own organs had given up and stopped trying. And with no way left to clear the fluid building up inside him, it just kept swelling him from the inside out. His legs bloated so badly the skin split open like overripe fruit, no way around it. His face changed shape so much that people who had known him for years could not pick him out of a photograph. And here is the part that will stop you cold. While all of this was happening to his body, he was online under a fake name, quietly handing out steroid advice to young men. He was telling complete strangers exactly how to use the same drugs that were rotting him alive from the inside. The smartest man in bodybuilding, and he was teaching other people to walk the same path that was killing him, while they had no idea who was really typing on the other end. Nasser El Sonbaty was 47 when he died. He spoke 7 languages fluently, held a university degree in history and political science, and people called him the professor because he earned every bit of it. Years after his death, his personal steroid log turned up inside the private journals of another professional bodybuilder. 2 veteran pros sat down to read exactly what Nasser had been taking at his peak, and both of them went silent. He was running liver-destroying oral steroids at more than double the daily dose either man had ever dared use themselves, and both of them had spent decades deep inside this sport. On top of that, he was injecting insulin and growth compounds just to force his body to absorb the staggering amounts of food he was eating, 6 to 7 meals a day. In the off-season, he carried over 330 pounds. He also developed a brutal infection in his shoulder, bad enough to need surgery, widely believed in the sport to have come from injecting oil straight into the muscle just to make it look bigger. He denied it. His body told the real story. In his final years, he needed a heart transplant. He never got one. His own body had disqualified itself, too far gone, too damaged for any surgeon to touch. He reportedly refused to be admitted to a hospital in his last days. For a man this sharp, this proud, dying, hooked to machines surrounded by strangers, might have felt like the one humiliation he could not stomach. He died in his sleep in a hotel room in Cairo on March 20, 2013, while visiting his family. The sport mourned him for a moment. Then, the very next season kicked off, and the same drugs at the same brutal doses kept flowing straight into the next generation, with absolutely nothing about the system changed. You're right, I overused that opener across multiple sections. Here is the rewrite without it. Mike Mentzer. A full bottle of heart medication sat on Mike Mentzer's kitchen counter every single morning for the last years of his life. He never dared to open it. His doctor had prescribed it, and every single morning, Mike walked right past it and left it untouched because he no longer trusted the doctors who had given it to him. The same way he no longer trusted the sport that had broken him. The same way he had stopped trusting almost anyone or anything left in his life. He died on June 10, 2001. His brother Ray, who had stayed by his side through the horrifying last moments of his life, died 2 days later in that same apartment. 2 brothers, both destroyed by the same sport. Both found in the same rooms where they had been slowly dying together. Here is something that had never happened before in this sport, and has never happened since. In 1979, during the Mr. Olympia prejudging, the round where judges score every competitor before the final show, Mike scored a perfect 300 points. Every single judge handed him the maximum score possible. Not one deducted point, not one judge in disagreement. That score said without any room for argument that this man was simply untouchable. At his absolute peak, people who trained alongside Mike say his weekly chemical intake hit somewhere around 5,000 milligrams across various compounds. He had published far smaller numbers in a bodybuilding magazine at the time. The people who were actually there said those published figures had nothing to do with reality. And heading into the 1980 Mr. Olympia, he stacked something else on top of everything already running through his system: a stimulant. The kind doctors prescribe for people with severe sleep disorders, people whose brains cannot stay conscious without medical intervention. Mike was using it daily as a performance booster during the most psychologically brutal stretch of his entire career. That mix, hard stimulants layered onto everything else, lit a fire inside his mind that never fully went out again. Then came 1980. Arnold Schwarzenegger had walked away from bodybuilding years earlier. He came back for that one single show, and he won. Mike was the expected champion. He had a perfect score from the year before backing him up. The judges handed the title to Arnold anyway, and nobody ever gave a real explanation for it. People sitting in that arena that night called it the most corrupt decision the sport had ever witnessed. Mike called it fixed, flat out. He said it publicly. He repeated it for years. He never once stopped saying it. And from that night forward, something inside him started coming apart. Paranoia took over completely. He became convinced his phone was tapped. He believed people were tailing him on the street. He stopped leaving his apartment. He smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. He stopped training entirely. A man who had built his entire reputation on logic and discipline simply stopped looking after himself in any way at all. By 40 years old, he looked like a ghost wrapped in the skin of the man who had once stood on that stage with a flawless score. His brother Ray never left his side. Ray's own body had already been wrecked by years of competing, but he stayed anyway because walking away from Mike meant leaving him completely alone, and Ray could not live with that. Mike died on June 10th. Ray died on June 12th, 2 days later, in that same apartment. Nobody found either of them right away. 2 brothers who had given everything to the same sport, gone within 48 hours of each other inside one quiet apartment, while the sport that destroyed them moved on without so much as a glance back. Dan Puckett. When Dan Puckett's autopsy came back, it revealed something twisted. His heart? Strong, flawless, beating with no warning signs at all. His liver? Completely untouched, not a trace of damage. His kidneys were working in perfect condition. There was absolutely nothing broken inside him, nothing that had any right to take his life. Except for one thing the autopsy could never see. The chemicals he'd been pumping into his body had reached his brain and rewired it so badly that once the cycle ended and those chemicals drained out, his mind was left in a place so dark he couldn't find a single reason to keep going. He pressed the trigger to his own head and pulled it, mercilessly. A body in flawless condition, a sport that destroyed him regardless. He was only 22 years old, and everyone who had ever known him said the exact same thing about him. Always grinning, always the one cracking jokes off in the corner. Now let me explain something before we go any further, because this is the detail almost nobody knows. And it's the very thing that makes Dan's death so much more horrifying than it first looks. Flood your body with the kind of synthetic hormone levels competitive bodybuilders run, and your own system shuts itself down completely, since the outside chemicals are already doing all the work. But here's the nightmare that hits once that cycle is over. When those compounds finally drain out of your system, your body cannot just flip itself back on. It has forgotten the process entirely. And in that void, hormone levels crash to almost nothing. What that does to the brain is savage. Scientists who've studied this collapse have compared it directly to the brain during cocaine or alcohol withdrawal. The brain stops producing the chemicals that make a person feel human, the ones that drag you out of bed in the morning, the ones that whisper that life might still be worth it. All of it goes dead silent. And that is exactly what happened inside Dan. He came off his cycle with no doctor anywhere near him, nobody monitoring what was unraveling inside his skull. Not a single person had warned him this storm was coming. His family only noticed him growing quieter, pulling further away, and they assumed it was nothing more than ordinary teenage pressure. It wasn't. It was his brain being torn apart from the inside while he sat alone in his room, staring at a face in the mirror that felt like a complete stranger looking back at him. Every night he poured it all into a journal his parents would only discover after he was already gone. He wrote about feeling trapped inside someone else's body with absolutely no way out. He wrote that the gym had once been the only place on earth he felt like himself, and that now even that had been ripped away from him too. After he died, his parents sat down and read every single word he'd left behind. After Dan's death, his story crept through bodybuilding forums in hushed whispers. What surfaced was gutting. Other lifters came forward anonymously, describing their own crashes after ending their cycles. Some admitted they had stood terrifyingly close to making the exact same choice Dan made. Not one of their coaches had ever warned them this was coming. The men who sold them these compounds pocketed their money and said nothing about what those compounds would do to their minds once the cycle was finished. Greg Kovacs. A cardiologist looked at Greg Kovacs' autopsy and said his heart looked like it belonged to an 80-year-old obese who had survived multiple heart attacks. And Greg was only 44 when he said it. And here's the part that makes this so much darker than it sounds. That heart had been seriously warning him for months before it finally gave out for good. Chest pains so brutal they froze him mid-step. Feet so swollen he could barely drag them across the floor. Breathing so strained that crossing from one room to another felt like a battle. His doctors had told him straight to his face, more than once, that his heart could not survive what he was putting it through. He sat in those rooms and listened to medical professionals warn him he was going to die if he didn't stop. And every single time, he stood up and walked back out the door without listening. At his heaviest, Greg weighed 420 pounds and was the single largest professional bodybuilder to ever exist. He ate 10,000 calories every single day during the off-season, 600 grams of protein, 1,000 grams of carbs, every day without fail, amounts that would land an average person in a hospital bed. The only reason his body could even process any of it was because of the compounds he was running, chemicals forcing his muscles to soak up everything he was throwing at them. But here's what nobody ever brings up. His heart was a muscle roughly the size of a fist. It was built by nature to push blood through a body weighing around 180 pounds. Greg weighed 420, which means that heart was grinding out more than double the workload it was ever designed for, every day, for years on end. That isn't dedication. That's a man slowly strangling his own heart one beat at a time. And there are rumors that have never been confirmed, but have also never gone away. People inside the Canadian bodybuilding scene have claimed Greg also used something so lethal it has killed multiple people who tried it. He needed it to burn the massive amounts of body fat that came from eating 10,000 calories a day while still trying to look shredded on a competition stage. Here's what that substance does. It was originally built as an industrial pesticide. Inside a human body, it forces every single calorie to convert straight into heat. Internal temperature climbs and climbs with nothing to stop it until the organs essentially cook from the inside. People have died from it with body temperatures so extreme they shouldn't have been possible in a living human. At 420 pounds, Greg couldn't tie his own shoes, couldn't fit comfortably into a regular car, couldn't sleep flat on his back because the weight of his own body pressing down on his chest would jolt him awake, choking. He slept propped up every single night or risked smothering under his own mass. He had given up every basic physical freedom a human being takes for granted, all in exchange for the title of being the biggest man alive. In November 2013, his heart simply stopped. He collapsed at home. Paramedics arrived. There was nothing left for them to do. When doctors examined the heart afterward, it was so swollen and so ravaged that the cardiologist said he was genuinely stunned it had kept this man alive for as long as it did. His wife later confirmed what everyone around him already knew. Greg had been in agony for months. The chest pains never stopped. The swelling was grotesque. He wanted to be remembered as the biggest man who ever lived. He got exactly that. He got the legacy he chased his whole life. He just never got to be alive for any part of it. Franco Columbu. Franco Columbu walked into the ocean on a warm California afternoon and never walked back out. By the time anyone on the beach realized something had gone wrong, he was already pulled under. This was the man who could burst a hot water bottle apart using nothing but the strength of his own lungs. The man who carried a fully loaded fridge up a staircase on his back. He pulled over 750 pounds off the floor in a deadlift and pressed more than 500 on bench. That same man dropped silently beneath the surface of the Pacific on August 30th, 2019, because his heart gave out, and nobody nearby could reach him before the current swallowed him whole. He was 78, and he had done everything the right way. Careful, moderate, educated, disciplined for decades straight. None of it was enough to reverse what those competitive years had already carved into his body while he wasn't looking. People will tell you Franco was one of the cautious ones. He never pushed himself to the extremes that wiped out the rest of them. But don't let that ease your mind for a second. Because being cautious in the bodybuilding world of the 1970s still meant injecting synthetic hormones into your body that doctors were prescribing freely with zero understanding of what those substances would do decades later. It still meant forcing a heart to push blood through 185 pounds of dense, packed muscle day after relentless day, and every one of those days left a mark behind. Thin layers of damage pressed quietly into his artery walls, too faint to notice, too small to detect, but stacking on top of each other silently, year after year, long after Franco had walked away from competing and started doing everything the right way. Franco stepped away from the sport. He went back to school and earned a doctorate in chiropractic medicine so he could understand the human body on a clinical level and take better care of himself. He stayed active. He swam regularly. He ate clean. He listened to every signal his body gave him for 33 years following his final competition. 33 years of doing it all correctly. His arteries didn't care. They had been keeping a silent record of the damage since the 70s, and nothing about Franco quitting the stage was going to make that stop. The autopsy uncovered heart disease and arterial blockage so advanced that his cardiovascular system resembled that of a man 2 to 3 decades older than he actually was. His closest friend, Arnold Schwarzenegger, broke down in tears in front of cameras. Arnold had trained right beside him for years, same era, same gyms, same everything. Arnold is still breathing. Arnold now lives with a pacemaker. Franco rests at the bottom of the ocean. Identical sport, identical era, identical path. One of them survived it. One of them didn't. Mohamed Benaziza. Mohamed Benaziza's skin hadn't even cooled from the stage lights when his body began shutting down. He had finished performing. The crowd had clapped. He walked backstage and then suddenly dropped. White foam spilled from his mouth. Other competitors standing nearby, still glistening with oil, still wearing their posing trunks, started screaming for someone to help. And every man back there knew something in that exact moment that not one of them would ever admit out loud afterward. Every single competitor in that room had taken similar substances that very same morning. Each of them stood there watching Mohamed convulse and foam on the floor, fully aware that it could just as easily have been them collapsing instead. Paramedics showed up within minutes. It didn't matter. At 10:20 that night, October 4th, 1992, Mohamed Benaziza was declared dead, and the federation whose stage he had just stood on told his devastated family that professional athletes accept the risks that come with the sport. That was the entire response handed to a family demanding to know why their son was gone. He knew the risks. That was the whole explanation they were given. Mohamed Benaziza was only 33 when he died. He had clawed his way up from nothing in Algeria, with no money behind him and no connections to open doors, and he had forced his way into the top tier of a sport that had never once made space for someone like him. Now look closely at what he was putting into his body before stepping onto that stage. There exists a drug built specifically for patients whose hearts are failing them. When a damaged heart can no longer pump correctly and dangerous fluid starts pooling around a person's organs, doctors use this compound to force the kidneys into flushing that fluid out fast. It exists purely as an emergency medical tool. Mohamed was shooting it directly into his bloodstream hours before competing because it also pulled water out from beneath the skin and made his muscles look sharper under stage lighting. Rich Gaspari, who shared that same stage with Mohamed, has gone on record saying he personally tried the pill form of this drug exactly one time, and the cramping it triggered was so violent and so total that he couldn't even imagine what injecting it straight into the bloodstream would feel like. Mohamed was injecting it directly, because this sport rewarded whoever was willing to push further than every other man standing beside him. It pulled so much water from his body that his blood thickened into something it was never built to become. The fluid that blood requires to move smoothly through the heart and through every vessel had simply vanished. His cardiovascular system was being forced to push something close to sludge through chambers that were already straining far past their breaking point. He walked on stage. He performed. The crowd applauded. And the second it ended, his body delivered the final unpayable bill. His family wanted answers. The federation repeated that their athletes accept the risks. The very next season began with not one single guideline changed. Muhammad came from nothing. He gave up everything. He followed every single rule the sport laid out for him. And the sport that ended his life couldn't even bring itself to change the rule that killed him before the next show even started. Aziz Shavershian. The same year Aziz died, his own brother was found guilty of dealing steroids. And that very brother had been standing right next to him in Thailand when it happened. Aziz Shavershian dropped dead alone on a wooden bench inside a Bangkok sauna heated to 90 degrees. His heart had carried a structural defect since the day he was born. He either knew about it or had every reason to have known. And rather than protect that already damaged heart, he had spent years pounding it with chemicals without holding anything back. It simply gave out and never restarted. His own brother is the one who found him on that bench. The man who had promised millions of young guys across the internet that they would all make it, didn't make it himself. Before his death, he had risen to become the most influential fitness personality online to an entire generation of young men desperate to believe they could look exactly like him. Aziz lived by one rule. His physique had to look its best 365 days of the year, not just leading into competitions. Every single day, year-round, which meant the substances running through his system never let up, not even once. And his heart, carrying that birth defect that had never been treated properly, was taking a chemical beating non-stop from the day he started until the day he died. And during those final weeks in Thailand, people close to him say he'd cranked everything up even further than usual. Beyond the standard bodybuilding compounds, he was taking fat-burning stimulants that spiked his heart rate and drove his core temperature even higher. He'd been drinking heavily. He'd been using recreational drugs that slam into the heart like a sledgehammer. He was badly dehydrated. And then he stepped into a sauna heated to 90 degrees. Picture exactly what was happening inside his body in that moment. Every substance in his system was already driving his heart rate upward. His blood pressure was spiking. His body temperature was already climbing before he ever walked through that sauna door. Then the heat hit all of it simultaneously. His heart, broken since birth and battered for years straight, had nothing left to give. No cushion, no backup plan. It just gave out. Now here's the detail the bodybuilding world has never wanted to say out loud. Said Shavershian, Aziz's own brother, was convicted on drug supply charges in Sydney back in 2011, the exact same year Aziz died. Saeed had been right there with him in Thailand on that trip. The substances coursing through Aziz's body in those final weeks may have passed through his own brother's hands first. After Aziz died, young men kept copying his routines because he had never once told the truth about what those routines actually involved. He showed the world the finished body and buried everything underneath that built it. Some of those young men are dead now too. No recognizable names attached. No tributes flooding timelines. No pages built in their memory. 10 men, 10 different paths to being destroyed by the same sport. Bodybuilding likes to call itself a sport, but everything you just heard isn't a sport. It's an industry. And industries don't grieve their dead. They just go looking for the next body to sell.